For USCFootball.com, I'm Jack Smith here with Chris Treviño for Instant Analysis after USC's 45-17 win over Fresno State. Chris, good win for USC. What were your initial reactions, key takeaways from the game?
You know, just right off the bat, the first night win in the Coliseum for Lincoln Riley, it was an electric atmosphere. Jack, they came in, they did the lights out intro, very, very dynamic, very exciting. I believe 67,000 around that were here in attendance. Great atmosphere, obviously not as hot, but they came out for a good show. We got to see a little bit of different USC offense. They did some different things in terms of how they got down the field, not just all explosive plays, a little bit drawing things out, a little bit longer drives. We're going to talk about that. And then on defense, kind of the same thing we've been seeing the first couple of games, a defense that is going to give up some explosive plays, going to give up a lot of yards, but in the end, they find ways to make plays, whether that's a turnover or keeping them out of the end zone. A very opportunistic defense, a very bend-don't-break defense. So we saw a lot of that. We saw the offense stumble a little bit in the second quarter there. We're going to talk about that. But they also came out really strong in that second half. This is the third consecutive game that USC has put up at least 40 points. Shout out to Shotgun for tweeting out that this is the first time that's happened. 3 consecutive games with 40 points since 2017. That Sam Darnold-led offense. And then this is the first time USC is open with 3 games of at least 40 points since 2005. And I don't know, Jack, if you were alive then, but that was a pretty good team. So very nice start to the season and a good win against a really good and experienced Fresno State team.
Absolutely. Let's start with the offense, and you kind of teased at it. They really can move the ball in a lot of different ways now. There was at least one drive, 15 plays, another drive, 4 plays. So this team can score in multiple ways if you want to start to break that down.
Yeah, I mean, Lincoln was asked about it. RJ Abedio, one of our writers, asked about, you had a 15-play drive that I believe it was 9 or 7 minutes. That's a very long time in Lincoln Riley offense. And he asked, how many plays have you had, or how many drives have you had that have been 15 plays over your course? And he was like, it's more than you think. He started laughing, and Caleb Williams as well. So they were both thinking the same thing. But the first three drives for USC were all double digits, 12, 12, and 15. And like you mentioned, they had a 4-play scoring drive and a 5-play scoring drive. So just doing it in multiple ways. And a lot of that was through the run game, being able to run on Fresno State, just kind of elongate it, carry the ball a little bit longer, give their defense a little bit more time to rest. And Lincoln mentioned, if you're a good team, you got to find multiple ways to get down the field. You got to find multiple ways to win the game. They're not all going to be explosive plays. Sometimes you got to grind it out. And he said, at the beginning, this was a great win. This is a physical win, a physical team. And, they were going to have to grind. They were going to have to be physical. And he said coming into this game, this defense and this team was going to challenge us in ways that we haven't been in. They haven't seen before. So this was a good test for them. They learned some things about themselves, whether that's on defense, whether on offense, and they showed today that they can grind it out. They can go again those long drives when they need to kind of draw out the clock, and those are going to be drives they're going to need against grindy opponents like a Utah or an Oregon State coming up. So they're going to need drives like that, and they showed they can do it, and they did that tonight.
And it feels like the first game, despite having a 4-touchdown performance, that Caleb Williams wasn't the star, wasn't the main focus, because the 2 running backs really stole the show. Travis Dye, Austin Jones, both had over 100 yards for the Trojans, as well as a touchdown on the ground. Do you want to get into what the running backs meant for USC today and the run game that really paced the second half?
Right, it was the story of the game, essentially. In that second quarter, they seemed a little bit shy about running the ball. I'm sure we might talk a little bit about that, but by the second half, it was just Austin Jones, Travis Dye, pounding the rock, carrying the Rocky, as Travis Dye likes to say. Before the game, they paid their mortgage, they dropped off their kids, they deposited funds in their retirement. There were grown men out there is what I'm trying to say, Jack. They, Austin Jones had that great run just behind us right here where his helmet came off, but that didn't matter. He kept running. He was like, I knew it was going to be a flag, but I didn't care. I saw that open hole. And like a true running back was like, I'm not going to waste a hole opened up by his offensive line as he decided to score. And then Travis Dye, right here in this corner of the end zone, had a grown man run, as I tweeted out, just breaking about 4 tackles. And that's the kind of stuff he showed at Oregon. He's not the biggest running back. He's not the strongest running back. But God damn it, if he's not going to drive his feet. And I asked him about that, like, talk about that run. He was like, which one? I'll say your grown man one. And everyone kind of laughed and he smiled. He's like, yep. Just about churning your feet, and that's a guy who never gives up, and that's a guy who's going to run hard. They both finished over 100 yards each. Very impressive for this offensive line, helping them pave the way. We're starting to see that run game start to get established, and that's going to be a big part of this offense moving forward. And I think the most impressive part, both of those guys average over 9 yards per carry, Jack. Not 5 yards, That's chump change. 7 yards, no. 9 yards. That's so impressive. Even Darwin Barlow, who had a couple touches, averaged over 8 yards per carry. So just an impressive day on the ground for them, and something they hope to keep moving forward with and improving on.
And you mentioned diversity. You have the offensive line making the big holes, but also you have Travis Dye breaking 4 or 5 tackles on his own. So the running backs diverse in their own way. So is Caleb Williams. He can throw the ball, as we've seen against Stanford and against Rice. This game, 2 rushing touchdowns. He was asked post-game, was it a point of emphasis for you to use your legs? Him and Lincoln Riley shared a laugh, like maybe they don't want him to use his legs a ton, but it's something that he clearly has, and it's a game changer that USC hasn't had at quarterback in a long time. He extended drives on his own. He got in the end zone on his own. His legs are a real factor for USC.
Absolutely. Early on display, had a broke somebody's ankles off, and he's a quarterback that runs, but sometimes he runs like a running back. He is physical. He'll put his shoulder down. He did take some hits on some couple of sacks and stuff, but obviously you don't want your star quarterback, taking hits like that. But he was asked about that, like you said, and he kind of said, that wasn't sort of an emphasis for me, because he talked about it early in the season in the spring, how he wanted to focus more on staying in the pocket, not taking off, being first to take off, sit there, find the open man. He said he wanted to be, and they say this a lot, he wants to be the best mailman there is. He just wants to sit in the pocket and deliver that ball to his weapons so they can make plays. So I think that was a funny quote, just like trying to be the best mailman out there. But, mailmen, sometimes they win Heisman. So I think that's obviously someone who's building towards a Heisman campaign. Another great performance, 4 touchdowns, spreading the ball around, getting it done with his feet and his arms. So just another really great performance for Caleb Williams. I think he was 25 of 37 with 284 yards. Turnover free, Jack. This team has still not coughed up the ball through 3 games. I know you didn't want to talk about that. You didn't want to jinx it a little bit, but I had to throw it out there. They're taking care of the ball, and Lincoln Riley said, he's really happy that Caleb specifically is taking care of the ball, not turning the ball over.
Yeah, I hate, when announcers jinx things, so I don't want to jinx things for the Trojans, who, again, get 2 turnovers on defense, don't turn the ball over, a perfectly clean turnover margin so far. As we shift to the offense to the defense, I think we got to start with one guy, the only guy who played on both sides for the Trojans today. That's tight end Malcolm Epps, had a touchdown in that very end zone over here, and an interception in this end zone over here. Well, what did you think of Malcolm Epps' performance today?
Getting it done on both end zones and both sides of the ball. I know a lot of people were confused initially, like, Jalen Smith got super tall all of a sudden. Even the USC football account tweeted out Jalen Smith, but no, that was 6'7" Malcolm Epps, obviously on the hands team, that Hail Mary team, and he was jokingly asked, so are you on the Hail Mary team all the time? He's like, I can't tell you that. Very personable, obviously, Malcolm Epps. So excited to see him obviously make a big play down here and obviously make a big play down there in the end zone. The final touchdown for the first team offense, the second consecutive game where a tight end has caught a touchdown, so that's an improvement for that position. That's a position that has struggled to get going, but in the Lincoln Riley offense, we're starting to see them come out a little bit more. But awesome plays for him to make, and Eric Gentry said that's a huge play to make. Obviously, another tall human being like Malcolm Epps, but he said that's a big play to make. Sometimes you don't think about it. That's just a play maybe you bat down, but they caught that ball. That's a lot of momentum for Fresno State going into halftime. So to have that, a pick, turn it over, gives them the momentum going in, even though they already had the momentum, but just a play that gets them in a good mood going to that second half, because that second quarter wasn't the greatest for USC in terms of, defense and offense, even though defense did make some plays, but to be able to get a stop there was big going to halftime.
Yeah, and so the defense, we've talked about it for almost 3 weeks now. They give up a lot of yards, but again, they don't give up a lot of points, and they get turnovers. Of course, the Malcolm Epps one at the end of the half, but they also forced a sack fumble, which we'll get into the player later. But 17 points allowed against a great Fresno State offense. Sure, they allowed a bunch of yards, but again, bending and not breaking. I think this USC defense, it has a very interesting quality about it, but it's had a good start to the season.
Yeah, I mean, that's their identity right now, Jack, until they, find a way to kind of cut down on those explosive plays and kind of be maybe more of a lockdown defense. They're winning with those turnovers, even though obviously the Malcolm Epps one is considered, it's kind of a weird in the middle kind of play, but still a turnover nonetheless. As you said, they got a big strip sack fumble that really turned the game a little bit. Not a lot of bit, a lot of bit, and we're going to probably get into that, but just another game of just getting the ball on the ground, getting the ball in their hands and giving it back to their offense to make plays. That's the perfect combination, especially when you have an offense as dynamic as Lincoln Riley's. You give that offense the ball, you give them series, they're going to put up points. They're going to put up points on you in a multiple different ways, like we mentioned. So anytime you give them the ball back in a short field, that's bad for the other team, Jack. I don't know how much any other way to emphasize it, but the defense did what they needed to do, kept them out of the end zone. They had a missed field goal, had an awesome goal line stop here by the second team defense, and I know you wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, exactly. Lincoln Riley, after the game, said that his favorite series on the defense was that stop at the goal line to end the game, to ice the game for the Trojans. It didn't matter at the time, but it's the twos in there, and he just mentioned that that's what this team needs to be like. Winning teams, great teams, make that stop. And so did Eric Gentry. He said that that's just the plays that we need to make. Alex Grinch, I think, loved it as well. But I just think it's a big sign for the Trojans, and it makes it so it's a 45-17 victory, not a 45-24 victory, which in the eyes of college football playoff voters, if they're not staying up late to watch the game, could make a possible difference. But it's that strain that Grinch and Riley have been talking about forever, and I just think that's a really big sign for the Trojans.
Yeah, and it sends a message to, everyone, not just on the defensive backups, but the offensive backups, like, those reps matter, and those reps mean something. They're not just there for you to go out there and, let them score. You have to, play with pride out there, and, for them to take a timeout down here to get them settled, and, that's them thinking about it. And Riley said, this is what we're about, setting that standard, not just with the ones, but with the twos and the threes and the scout. And that's how you build a championship team. That's how you build a culture, is making those plays that maybe they don't matter in the long term, but they matter within this team, and they matter in the long term for the foundation of a program. And Eric Gentry said, he said to those guys, championship teams finish. And yes, the game was already handily in the hands of USC's favor, but he said 17-24, that's a huge difference. It's not just 7 points, and it goes far beyond just 7 points on the board. It goes beyond, the pride of this defense and sort of getting the confidence for those young guys. So I thought that was a very cool moment, and something that for Lincoln Riley to kind of point out in his press conference, just how much that meant. And I think that sends a great message for the team, the defense, and the offense when they get in, because obviously the offense did not get a lot of backup time play, but those reps are still important, as I mentioned. And I feel like if the offense had driven down the field, he would have said, that was also a great thing to see that happen. And they do need to get those guys some reps, but a really cool moment to end the game and end a really good night for the Trojans.
And it's funny you mentioned the timeout, because they also took a timeout before the Hail Mary, which allowed them to get Malcolm Epps into the game, which is the interception that teams and the people on the team are just raving about at this moment. I mean, I bet you think Texas, when they played USC a couple of years ago before the big jump pass touchdown, like I bet you they think that they should have taken a timeout at that point. Like, these are just the kind of plays that don't allow the other team to get into the game. It's the kind of decisions that in the long run, I think are going to be great for this new era of Trojan football. One player we have to highlight on the defensive side of the ball is Solomon Byrd. Lincoln Riley talked earlier this season about how at Oklahoma they had a couple guys go from, bottom of the depth chart to the top players in the country, with Marquise Brown being a notable option, and we were looking at the USC roster like, who could this possibly be? Right now, that's Solomon Byrd. Started on the 3 team, only got 5 snaps against Rice, which Lincoln Riley and Solomon talked about in the post-game press conference, but today, in the last 2 games, he's been the marquee player on the USC defense.
Yeah, 3 sacks in the last 2 games. Obviously, he ended the game last week with a big, 4th down sack, and you're right, he did. He knew exactly how many snaps. Lincoln turned to him. He's like, how many snaps do you play? He was like, 5. He knew, and he said, it was kind of hard for him to start out on the 3rd team. He was a guy coming from Wyoming where he was a starter. He was a big name on this defense, and he took the opportunity to come here to USC, and you see it paying off. And that's sort of, again, what Lincoln Riley hit on, like, that's what we're about, is, building these guys up. You may start on the 3rd team, but, you could be out here making the plays with the ones, and that's kind of like the model, pointing to Solomon Byrd, like, this is what we do, this is what we want the whole team to be. Anyone could step up and play at any moment and make big plays. And obviously he had that huge strip sack fumble, on Jake Haener. Unfortunately, it did come with a little bit of an injury, and, obviously you never want to see a game go that way. This is a very competitive team when they have their number 1 quarterback in. Jake Haener, experienced guy, a talented guy who had a big season last year. You hope, it's nothing long term. Did look bad in the moment, coming down on his leg. So that was obviously a turning point for them and that Fresno State offense and that team. You could see they were a little bit demoralized after that, on the sideline as the game went on. So, that's just a tough break for them and the Bulldog team. Jake is a competitor. He came in here saying a lot of stuff about how he was going to come out here and put it out there, and they were moving the ball. They just obviously did not get into the end zone, and Lincoln Riley said they have so much respect for that team over there, so they didn't really change anything about it. They were going out there and play their hardest going against a backup quarterback, and he was very complimentary of Jeff Tedford. He called him one of the best QB coaches that this game has ever seen, and that's really high praise from a guy who's also one of the best quarterback coaches the game has ever seen. So a lot of respect for them, and they were going to go out there. He knew they were going to have a backup ready, someone ready to play and compete, so they could not take the foot off the gas and take their step back with their number one QB out. So very unfortunate to have that happen, but you still got to play the game.
Yeah, exactly. I asked Alex Grinch about Solomon Byrd after the game. He was like, "Oh, that's what I want to talk about." Like, yes, I want to talk about Solomon Byrd because he perfectly embodies exactly what Alex Grinch has been preaching to us. He strains to the ball. He puts a ton of effort in. He mentioned he does 1/11th of what the defense needs, and if he's making his play, chances are the defense is going to make the right play in general. So Solomon Byrd perfectly embodying what Lincoln Riley and Alex Grinch have been talking to us about all offseason and into the season as well. We got a couple updates for USC injured players, and then we also can maybe touch note on some players that didn't play today. Learned that Bobby Haskins was okay. He just didn't come into the game because at that point it was already out of reach. But what did you learn from what Lincoln said after the game, and then just some guys who didn't play today?
Right. It was obviously a little bit concerning. That's one of the big storylines is, the left tackle situation. Cortland Ford did suit up, but he did not go in the game. It felt like a situation where very emergency if they want to use him, but I think they want to get him healthy for the big road game next week. But Haskins did go down a couple times, went into the medical tent a couple times. But like you said, Lincoln Riley said he was good after. He could have gone back in if they needed him to. He was joking after the game, and everyone started cracking up. We don't know exactly what he said, but Lincoln Riley said, I can't repeat it. So, maybe a little bit of salty language out there in the locker room. So that's a great sign. And, you hope, got to get him healthy, big road game coming up, and that left tackle spot. Little dicey, they had Mason Murphy come in, the young guy, not quite ready, but it was key to get him some reps there at the end, but he did give up a pressure and a sack on that first play in the second quarter. So got to build those guys up, got to give them a little more playing time, but you hope, Cortland and Bobby Haskins are healthy moving forward, especially going to a big road game. Dejon Benton made his return. He was clubbed up. He had that wrist injury, coming off that Rice game. So he was impactful. He had some couple rushes. I felt like he had a couple holds against him, but we won't get into that. And then Romello Height, as expected, did not suit up, did not play the starting edge rusher. That's why we got more Solomon Byrd today. But those are kind of the big ones. Jamar Sakona, who played a little bit of a rotational defensive line spot for the defense against Stanford. He did not suit up. That's a little bit a blow to the depth, but it was kind of a wash with getting Dejon back, even though he's not fully healthy with that club hand. But that's something to monitor. You always want that defensive line depth. We saw more Earl Barquette, I feel like. The TCU transfer hasn't played a lot as a result of Jamar kind of not playing this week. So something to keep an eye on as we move forward.
Yeah, we also saw Damani Jackson dressed for the game. I'm not sure he got in unless he did on that last drive, but good to see him dressed for the game. And you mentioned road game next week, going to Corvallis to take on the Oregon State Beavers. One of the games that we've circled is going to be one of the bigger tests for the Trojans this season, as Oregon State dominated here in the Coliseum last year. They have a style that could prove to be a little troublesome for the Trojan defense. That being said, though, through 3 games now, we've seen a lot of yards in each game allowed by the defense. Still, we haven't seen a lot of points, so maybe this is just going to be what the USC defense is like this year. What are your thoughts going into Corvallis next week?
Yeah, we'll talk more about it as we go through the week, but, big game, big road game. No one's going to be able to see it on the Pac-12 network. I'm sorry, I had to get that joke in there, so make sure you follow us for all that coverage, but it's going to be a big one. Possibly a top 25 matchup if Oregon State is able to sneak into the top. Oregon State is able to sneak into the top 25. This is that big game where I think you're going to learn a lot about USC. Going to road, hostile environment. Corvallis is a very tough place to play. They're going to come out. The stadium is going to feel smaller, more intimate, just because they're doing renovations. So half their stadium is knocked down. So I expect them to be rowdy. I expect them to be loud. I expect it to be rocking at that stadium. So that's going to be a big test for them. Stanford felt more like 60-40 in terms of USC fans on the road. I don't think that's going to be the case in Corvallis. So they're going to come ready for that run game, that offensive line. They're going to try to bully them in this kind of smaller USC defensive front. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. They get a couple turnovers. I like them to kind of continue this progress they've been making, but they cannot keep them out of the end zone. We might see a shootout, Jack. A team where Oregon State, maybe they're going to slow it down a little bit, kind of keep the possessions low for USC's offense. So could be an interesting one. It's going to be a big one, especially a big primer, going to that big Utah road game down the road. But this is a big one, and it's going to tell a lot about this team.
Yeah, you mentioned crowd size. I feel like we got to give a shout out to the fans that came out to the Coliseum today. 67,000 people, I think we said, piled in here. Fresno State and USC fans alike, but it was a really loud USC crowd. Lots of boos and then lots of cheers for when the Trojans scored. I think it was maybe one of the best crowds the Trojans will see here at the Coliseum all season, but I think Max Williams will be happy. I think Lincoln Riley will be happy that people are starting to recognize that USC football might be back a little bit, and they packed the Collie tonight.
I'm not in on saying USC's back at all, Jack. You know that. It's college football playoff. Then we can say they're back.
I said the fans might be thinking that they're back. I mean, the student section wants Bama and Georgia.
Just quickly on that, the student section at the other end, we're chanting, "We want Georgia." No, you don't. You don't want Georgia. I am telling you right now, you do not want Georgia.
Unless it's the national title game.
Unless it's the national title game, you do not want Georgia. This defense is not ready for a caliber offense like Georgia. So let's just take it a step back a little bit. To be fair, they were very drunk over there, so maybe that was having to do with it. You know, a little bit drunk on the libations, drunk on the big win over Fresno State. Let's settle down. They're not ready for the Bulldogs yet. They had some growing to do.
They beat the Bulldogs here today. I don't know what you're talking about.
I walked into that one. They're not ready for the big Bulldogs. Let's say that the #1 Bulldogs. Yes, they did get a Bulldog win. That's fair. You got me there. But yeah, very interesting, funny moment down there. But let's let them take a step back a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I've been Jack Smith, Chris Treviño, Instant Analysis, USC pulling off the 45-17 win against Fresno State. Next week they'll be in Corvallis. Make sure you're following along on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, and then go to the website. There's going to be a bunch of interviews from today. We filmed highlights throughout the game, so there's tons of USC football content. But anyways, thank you guys, and we'll see you next time.
Shout out to Coach Keith.